Paulie Hannah Class was born on January 3, 1981 in Fairfax, California. She was the only child of Mark Class and Eve Nichols, who divorced when she was just 2 years old. After the divorce, Eve took custody of Paulie and Mark remarried to a woman named Violet. In 1987, when Paulie was 6 years old, her mother met a man named Alan Nichol. They began a relationship and later had a daughter named Annie. Due to Alan's work, the family was constantly moving around the state of California. In 1992, Eve and Alan split up and then Eve moved to Petaluma town, taking her 2 daughters with her. Petaluma is a city located in the state of California and is about 40 kilometers from Fairfax, where Paulie was born. There, Eve started working in a clothing store, while Paulie helped her a lot with the housework and taking care of her stepsister. Later, Paulie began taking classes at a community theater, learned to play the clarinet, and was accepted into a school band, and shortly afterward began singing in a children's choir. She loved music and theater and dreamed of acting professionally in a field someday. Paulie was adapting very well to the changes in the new city. She also made several friends. On October 1st, 1993, Paulie had invited her 2 friends to a sleepover at her house. While Paulie was having fun with her friends in her room, her mother was resting in the next room, having taken her headache and sleeping pills. At around 10:30 p.m., Paulie told her friends she was going to get some sleeping bags, and as soon as she left the room, she came face to face with a tall, bearded man holding a backpack and a knife. At that moment, he entered the room and then threatened the girls with a knife, saying that if they screamed, he would cut their throats. The man asked which one of them lived in the house. Paulie replied that it was her, so he bound the girls' feet and hands with strips of torn fabric and covered their heads with pillowcases. After that, he asked them to count to 1,000. That's when he picked up Paulie, who was crying a lot, and took her with him, putting her in his car. The girls waited to hear the noise of the front door, so they sat with their backs to each other to try to untie themselves, but it didn't work. That's when one of the girls managed to free herself by putting her arms around her legs and helped the other friends to untie themselves. They were running, screaming to wake up Eve, Paulie's mother, explaining what had happened, and Eve immediately called the police, who quickly arrived at the scene. The FBI was also called in to help with the investigation and arrived at the house shortly after midnight. According to the girl's testimony, while the kidnapper took Paulie, she asked him not to hurt her mother or her little sister. Police issued a kidnapping alert to all police departments in the region and surrounding towns, and an intense search began. A witness who lived nearby said he saw a man around 10 p.m. walking down the street, and then he entered Paulie's house through the front door. As the man seemed quite at ease, the witness deduced that it was none of the family, and therefore did not suspect anything. From the way the man entered the house, the police considered that perhaps Paulie's father, Mark Class, could be the kidnapper, as in most cases the kidnapper is someone close to the victim. Mark and Eve were divorced and he lived in Sausalito, a town about 50 kilometers from Petaluma, where Paulie lived with her mother. Despite being considered a suspect initially, Mark Class was ruled out by the police as the perpetrator of the kidnapping. A fingerprint of the kidnapper's palm was found and compared to all Paulie's family members, but it didn't match any of them. As the only witness were the girls, the police made a composite portrait of the man with the characteristics they passed. About 4,000 people were helping the search for Paulie. Actress Winona Ryder, who was raised in Petaluma, took notice of the case and offered a $200,000 reward to anyone who provided any information that would help find Paulie so she could return home safely. Due to the proportion that the disclosure took, Paulie's family began to receive several prank calls from malicious people who claimed to be with Paulie, asking for money in return. As the family's phone was tapped, the police can trace the calls and verify the veracity of the information. Paulie's photo was shown on TV, radio, and newspaper programs, and also for the first time in a kidnapping case, the police had the help of the internet. Previously, posters with photos of missing children were faxed or distributed manually, but with the internet, Paulie's photo can be scanned with good clarity and search a much wider audience. This was one of the reasons why so many people heard about this case. Her disappearance was even reported in other countries, making Paulie the first to go viral. The police also carried out aerial searches throughout the region and had about 30 sniffer dogs. People in Petaluma and the surrounding communities came together and formed the Paulie Class Search Center. The searches continued for 9 weeks. Everyone was determined to find Paulie without sparing efforts. After a few more weeks, the police obtained new information about the crime. On October 1st, the same day as the kidnapping at around 11:30 p.m., a woman named Dana, who lived in a rural area in Santa Rosa, a town located 26 kilometers from Petaluma, went to the police department. She reported that Shannon, her daughter's nanny, was leaving her house when a man stopped her on the road, saying that his car had become stuck in the mud. He kept insisting that Shannon get out of her car and help him. Shannon, very scared, ran off with her car, leaving the man there, and called Diana from a payphone, warning that there was a strange man inside her property. Diana took her daughter and immediately left the house. On the way, she passed the car, but the man was not there. Then she went straight to the police to report what happened. When officers arrived at the scene to investigate, they approached the man, who identified himself as Richard Allen Davis. The officers noticed that he was a little agitated and had 3 leaves in his hair. Richard told officers he hadn't realized he was on a private property and said he was lost and ended up jamming the car. Officers looked inside the vehicle but found nothing suspicious. They checked his driver's license that everything was in order, and since Dana didn't want to press charges, the cops just told him not to enter the property anymore and released him without consulting his criminal record. The days passed and the searches continued, but without success. On November 28, 1993, 2 months after Paulie's kidnapping, Dana, the same woman who reported that a man who broke into her property, contacted the police again. This time, she said she was inspecting another area of the region when she found, in an area of woods, torn ballad shoe straps and fabric strips with knots and hair strands. Detective Mike Meese, responsible for investigating the kidnapping, went to the scene to collect evidence, and after some analysis found that straps found in the woods were part of the same shirt as the straps found in Paulie's room to tie the other girls. Mike Meese decided to consult the criminal history of Richard, the man who had been in that area on the day of the kidnapping. Richard had an extensive criminal record. He was first arrested on March 6, 1967 at age 12, and has since been arrested numerous times for a variety of different crimes. He had already been arrested twice for kidnapping and was being sought by justice at the time for violating his parole. When detectives saw that he had violated parole, they decided to go to his house to take him into custody, but Richard was not home when they arrived. On November 3, 1993, some police officers were doing a routine patrol when they decided to board a van. After consulting the driver's documents, they saw that it was Richard Allen Davis. Officers took Richard into custody and contacted Detective Mike Meese, who was in charge of the case. The girls who were with Paulie on the day of her disappearance were called to the police department to recognize the kidnapper and confirm that it was Richard. With Richard in custody, his palm print was analyzed and compared to the palm print found in Paulie's room. The result was positive, confirming that Richard was responsible for the kidnapping. Even with all the evidence and witnesses pointing out that he was responsible for the crime, he just denied it. As a strategy, the detectives decided to keep the evidence they had about Richard's palm print a secret so he wouldn't know and he'd think he might have some chance of getting away with it. One day, while in prison, Richard received a visit from a friend who showed him a newspaper with the news all about the evidence the police had against him and said it was better if he told the whole truth. On December 4th, 1993, Richard confessed to being responsible for the kidnapping and murder of little Paulie. He told the detectives everything in detail. In his confession, Richard said that on October 1st he had gotten a free pass to spend the night at his mother's house in Petaluma. He had had a few beers and was wandering down the street when he was approached by a man who wanted to sell him drugs. He decided to buy and then went to a bar to buy more beers. After drinking the beers, he said he continued walking down the street, aimlessly. He didn't know where he was or where he was going. That's when he passed Paulie's house. He looked out the window, saw the TV, and heard voices and laughter, and claimed that after that he didn't remember anything else. Still, according to his confession, the only thing he said he remembered was that he was in his car driving and had a little girl sitting and tied up next to him. She was crying a lot and complaining that her hands were tingling, so he loosened the knot and wondered what he was going to do next. He decided to leave the road he was on and ended up getting stuck in the mud, so he ordered Paulie to get out of the car and carried her on his back for 27 meters into the woods. Richard left the girl in the woods and went back to where his vehicle was. He said he planned to leave her there in the dark until he figured out how to get the car out of the way. That's when the police showed up. The officers searched his car, and as they didn't find anything suspicious, they helped him to free the vehicle and released him. Richard said he came back after 30 minutes to pick up Paulie in the woods. It was at this point that he decided he needed to get rid of her, so he strangled her with a piece of cloth and buried her in a shallow grave. That same night of Richard's confession, the detectives asked him to show them where the girl's body was. It was located on Route 101, about 40 minutes from Petaluma. Arriving there, they located the girl's body and then broke the sad news to her family. From that moment on, Richard was awaiting his trial. Police officers who went to respond to that nanny's complaint that there was a vehicle stuck on a private property on October 1st said they were unaware of the alert that was issued by Paulie's disappearance, as they claimed they were on a different radio frequency. On August 5, 1996, 3 years after the crime, Richard Allen Davis was sentenced to death for robbery, larceny, kidnapping, lewd act against a child, and murder. He is currently on death row at San Quentin State Prison in California. As the judge read his sentence in court, Richard smiled and made obscene gestures at the camera. The judge said that giving a death sentence is always difficult, but Richard's attitude in court made it easier. Mark Glass, Paulie's father, became an advocate for children and created the Glass Kids Foundation, which helped families who were or have been through the same situation. He has made himself available to parents of missing children and often appears on TV shows to talk about the matter. Actor Robbie Williams, who died in 2014, was touched by the whole thing. At the time, he reached out to Annie, Paulie's stepsister, and the girls who were with her that night to spend time with them and make them laugh so they could forget a little about everything that had happened. According to some friends, Paulie had a dream of someday meeting actress Winona Ryder. After Richard's conviction, Winona Ryder starred in a film version of Little Women, which had been Paulie's favorite book, and dedicated it to her, giving all profits from her work to charities and families of missing children. Well folks, that's it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Best wishes, and I'll see you next time.